inform them also that they can step out of the study at any point without detriment to themselves. Okay? So you tell them up front all these various aspects in your introduction to the respondents. Also provide very clear instructions for completion, and if any scale changes, make that very clear before they fill it in. Because the last thing you need is for a person to fill in the questionnaires with the wrong interpretation of the scale. You'll get wrong answers. Question, there first.
Based on your experience, you can have the same instrument and you can deliver it in different ways, and you can get respondents to respond in different ways. So you can send it and ask them to fill it out by hand and post it back to you. You can ask them to go onto the internet and use survey methods like that. You can you can go through it with them. The pros and cons of that, and if you did a multiple approach, does that cause trouble? Can you lump them all together, or is it a problem?
It's just going to come to the next part, right? Okay, on appearance, go ahead.
Yes. Do you have to tell the respondents what this thing's about? Because you might be letting the cat out of the bag.
You do it always in a very general sense, but the respondent has to know what the study is about. You have to establish rapport, you have to tell them what it is about. So in a very general sense, okay? Because it's your opportunity to keep in line with the rigor of research about not being deceptive. The last thing you do is tell them it's for this and use it for something else, okay? So it's very important for you to give them a general sense of what it is about. They need to be informed, and they need to make an informed decision. Do I participate or don't I? So yes, it's always good to. Okay, so basically, let your questionnaire look good so that people want to fill it in. I have very clear instructions as well. And then we come to the last powder blue part on questionnaire administration and testing the goodness of the data. That part answers your question. How are you going to administer this questionnaire? Are you going to hand it out and collect it now? Are you going to email it so people can receive it on email and answer it where that is called self-administration? Or are you going to give it to the manager who's then going to give it out to their staff and collect it? You can use a mixed mode, which is quite fun. Okay? Remember, the response rates are often very, very small. And the last thing you want is to limit it to one channel of distribution, which is going to make your response rate even smaller. You might want to have various channels of distribution in order to increase your response rate, and it is quite fine provided that your channels of distribution are for different levels of staff. You cannot give me one here now because I'm here and then email it to my office. Because what's going to happen in that case, if I'm so diligent and nice to you, I'm going to fill two, but that's going to affect your results. So you've got to then in your plan, in your methodology say that I'm using a mixed mode. For the lower levels in the organizational structure, I'm going to meet them and help them with clarification on different questions. Then for the middle managers who understand it better, I'm going to email it off there to them. And then perhaps to that board meeting taking place, let me just take it to the board meeting and leave it there. Those people will fill it in and I'll collect it later. So you've got different approaches, it is quite fine. As long as you don't mix the approaches for the same group of people, because you might just have two questionnaires filled in. Not that people are so enthusiastic that they're going to fill your questionnaires in duplicate, but to avoid your results being affected, you will use different approaches for different groups of people. And that will become part of your methodology to say what methodology you follow. Okay? That is the administration of the questionnaire, how you're actually going to give it out. And of course, testing the goodness was testing the process. That is the pilot study. Okay? Now, I just want to clear one misconception. Many people think that a pilot study is there because it's only there to test the validity and the reliability of the results. That is wrong. The pilot study is there not only to test validity and reliability so that you get accurate results, but it's also there to test process. protocols that you would use for your larger study. You can't say that in my larger study, I'm going to email all my questionnaires. But now, I'm only giving out 10 for my pilot, I'll hand deliver it. You're not testing your process. It might just be that when you do your email set, you're hardly getting anything back. Why? The email addresses were wrong. Okay? The emails were blocked because the questionnaire was of a certain capacity. The emails were blocked because it came from SurveyMonkey and the organization blocked certain addresses. Now, had you done your same process in your pilot study, you would have figured it out then, rather than coming to the big study and then figuring out, hey, I can't use this process, or there is a problem in this process, and so forth. You could have identified that problem when you did your pilot study. So go away from the notion that a pilot study is only to test validity and reliability. It's to test the entire process and protocol that you would use for your final study. So whatever process you use in the big study, use in the trial run of the small study. Are there any questions at that point?
I want to ask about leaving questions out when you're filling in questionnaires, and particularly for the online, when you're setting up an online questionnaire, you can choose whether people have to answer that question or it's optional to answer the question. Obviously, the researcher wants everyone to answer all the questions, but I've had questionnaires that insisted that every single question was answered, and they were asking me questions that I had no idea what the answer was, and I wanted to leave out, and in actual fact,
And it didn't allow you to.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, that's like when forced compliance becomes absolutely imperative. You would do that. I would actually advise that one does not do that for their study. You can reduce your response rate, because people say, oh, I really don't know the answer to this, and desert that questionnaire. You can also affect your results. If you go for forced compliance and people really don't have an answer, then you're affecting your own results at the end of the day. My advice to you is go for, if you don't want to answer that, let them go on. Because in any questionnaire, you are allowed 25% of your questionnaire not to be filled in, where a person would record not a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but will record a 0. It falls under my next part of data analysis. But just to answer you at this point in time, it's better not to force people, because if they give you an answer because they have to, then it's not necessarily going to contribute to your study. Okay? That takes us to the end of all the do's, do nots, tools for questionnaire design. And what Professor MacArthur gave you was an exercise which I had to see that you were able to apply the different things that we went through today. I also have it on slide, but you have it in front of you. However, time constraints are not going to allow us to do this entire exercise. What this exercise is simply looking at is looking at the influence of leadership styles on employee motivation. It's looking at 3 different leadership styles: authoritarian, transactional, and transformational. And it says that there are different aspects that also play a part in influencing employee motivation, and that covers the biographical variables. So basically from this, we were going to together design a questionnaire. I would suggest that you try it on your own, because we're not going to be able to do it. However, if I leave it completely out, this part is going to be irrelevant to you, because you now know that 1, 4, 7, 10, and 13 make up pay. You now know that they must be categorized. You know that they must cluster. You know that in the factor analysis they must have good item loadings. But what do they relate to? You don't know how to create those items. You've done the do's and don'ts. Now, how to create the items? And I think that's where you're going to be stuck if I leave you without doing this exercise at all. To know what goes, how these 5 items are going to be created, I did do an example earlier, looking at pay in terms of its market related, whether it is fair, whether it is applied consistently, whether it's related to effort, whether people in the same job doing exactly the same activities are paid fairly. So those might be the 5 that we come up with. But that was me thumb sucking here. How do you create your items? You would go back to your already well done, well written literature. Okay? And then you would draw out items that are recurring in terms of measuring pay, for example. In this case, I've extracted 3 different, and I put it in bold so you can look at it in first sight, 3 different extracts of authoritarian leadership style, transactional leadership, transformational leadership. And you'd want to read your chapter or so on authoritarian leadership style, see what are 5 constantly recurring themes that surface and create these 5 items or more, as you already know. Okay? Looking at that extract there. Now remember, when you create your items, it's always in statement form so that people can agree or disagree or whatever, think it's important or unimportant, whatever your scale is on it. But when you put in an item, you don't put it in the 3rd person. It's always in the 1st person. Like I'm filling it, I'm reading it, it must apply to me. In my organization. You must not write it as in your organization. While I'm reading it, I must personalize it. In my organization, pay is consistently whatever, right? So you've got to write it in the 1st person. Let's look at authoritarian. I'm not going to do all, we're just going to do one. An authoritarian leadership style can be defined as a behavior, those of you who need it on, can be defined as the behavior that asserts absolute authority and control over subordinates and demands unquestionable obedience from subordinates. In the authoritarian style of leadership, there is little or no communication from the top level to the bottom level in an organization. There is also a lack of collaboration and discussion about organizational goals between these 2 levels. Authoritarian or autocratic leadership style can be understood as a way in which the leader makes all the necessary decisions regarding the organization. This style is often linked to that of a military approach, in that it is rigid, aggressive, and regarded as tribal. Hostility can be created between leaders and subordinates, as there is no room for discussion and collaboration because a leader's decision is final. Now I've got that in one paragraph. You're going to have a chapter of things that define a particular whole phenomenon that you are measuring, okay? So now when we've got that, that is your guide of what is recurring for me to include as my items in my questionnaire, okay? If we take that, at first glance, you know that there are certain key aspects in authoritarian leadership style that you've got to look at. You've got to tap into, for example, anybody?
Room for discussion and collaboration.
Collaboration and?
Room for discussion.
No room for discussion and collaboration. So discussion, collaboration. Anyone else? Communication. So we've got, I think there's a word under it. So we've got discussion, collaboration. We've got another aspect on communication. Any other aspects? Decision making.
Conservation.
Control.
Okay. Control.
Organizational goals. And
Organizational goals in.
who decides about the
I'm not going to go with decision making. Perhaps, but we could put it in. You can't go more than 5, remember? Organizational goals, and I heard something like
Absolute obedience.
Confrontation. Now remember, you're going to try and state it in a way that is personal, where the person is going to read it and immediately respond. Okay? You're also going to tap into all key aspects. You can't go more than 5, and if you can capture it all within 5, that's good enough too. You're going to write it in a way that the person reading it is going to personalize it. So let's take discussion and collaboration. Your statement would be something to the effect that in my organization,
My manager involves me in the discussion of.
okay, my manager involves me in the discussion of whatever, right? Remember, this is authoritarian. That means that will become a reverse question. So immediately you got to remember that's a reverse, right? Alternatively, if you don't want to make that a reverse question, in my organization, my manager does not involve me in, or employees are not involved in. Sometimes you might want to state as employees because you as an individual may not be at that level where you engage in discussion and collaboration, but people a little higher than you do. So you may not want to personalize that as I get involved, but employees do not get involved, okay? And if we take communication, the similar kind of thing. Personalize it within that person's organizational context, okay? And make sure that the scale is determined at that point. If you asked it as a negative, immediately in your scrap copy, put in an R. You know it's a reverse question. Okay? Is that making sense? Is someone still not grappling it? Now, somewhere in the exercise was a bit of a catch. And that was what variables to include. All right? Where it said that the last one, the literature on leadership stance and motivation also imply that males and female employees varying in age and years of service in the organization display varying degrees of motivation. Your literature already told you what was important. So you've got to be sure to have those particular variables in your nominal data, in your biographical data. Okay? The other important thing is, the catch now, was the sentence in your first paragraph, second last line. The study was triggered by the observation that employees in various departments have differing levels of motivation, and it is suspected that this is related to the varying leadership styles. That word, the various departments, means that you may want to include various departments as one of your organizational specific characteristics in section A. So you want to touch into departments, but suspect that this is related to leadership styles may be that there is a possibility that it's not just leadership style. That immediately tells you you have to have the open-ended question at the end of the questionnaire asking, is there anything else that influences your level of motivation? Okay, so because you suspect, is there anything else? You need to get a full answer. So when you create these different dimensions, apply all the do nots. Do not go and say, in my organization, I engage in discussion and collaboration, or I engage in discussion and decision making, and mix them up, because then you're going to break the rules of double barrel questions and so forth. There was a question in the back.
If I'm going to make like the question you suggested now, that is there anything that influences the leadership style? And then it prompts to get a yes and a no.
No.
Then probably I might just, yeah, because it might want them for another question as well, which is why. But what if you ask the question which says, what else?
Okay, you can, but what I was actually meaning was...
You don't want then the response to kind of like
Yes.
get stuck, and then yeah, everyone said yes, but what was the reason?
What was it? Yeah. Well,
Or
actually,
what
what I'm
was it?
getting at is we need to tap into it. So if there is anything that other than these that influences your employee motivation, you leave 5 lines for them to fill it in. And that's where the aspect of post-coding comes in, right? Which I needed to get back to. That open-ended question in the end is going to throw a whole lot of aspects. And a person might say, my motivation depends on, remember we're looking at 3 types of leadership style, not my leader, but my motivation depends on the extent to which I have the opportunity for promotions. And the person would put promotion there, or opportunities for promotion. Okay? Now you can postcode that. You can say that anything other than the 3 types of leadership style is going to be promotion or whatever else. Training and development, then you postcode that as 2. So in a nutshell, whatever long story they tell you, try and encapsulate it into one phrase and postcode that phrase as all things where comments are relating to promotion will be postcoded as 1. All things related to I like to be trained and I like my development needs to be identified or whatever else long stories they give you, we put it into category 2. So you postcoding. We're no longer pre-coding, we postcoding. Okay, that takes us to the end of questionnaire design. I know it's taken much longer than we thought to get here. Are there any questions on questionnaire design? Now, the questionnaire design is a direct link into, well, just to give you a sense, this is what your questionnaire would look like. Section A, biographical data with your pre-coded items, and your section B, which relates to leadership styles and how you would divide. That's if we went ahead and did the exercises, we would have had the statements in there already. Okay. The questionnaire leads us straight into data analysis. But before we analyze data, there must be preparation. You've got to look at your spreadsheet and you've got to do a pre-analysis of the spreadsheet. Because if in the spreadsheet on a 1 to 5 point scale, under that 5th respondent, question 8, instead of putting 5, your finger double hit and you've got 55. That's going to affect your mean completely. Okay? Your result is going to immediately shout out something other than the correct result. So therefore, when you captured all your data and you know how, in gender, if you're a male, if there was a male subject, you'll capture 1. In age, if there was a person 30 to 39, in terms of what we did earlier, you'll capture 2. In the question 1, if a person put 4, you'll capture 4, and you'll have a whole spreadsheet of responses. Now, if you've got a wrong capturing, that's going to affect your results. So your first step is data preparation and preliminary analysis, meaning screen your sheet. Screen your spreadsheet. See that there's nothing wrong. Okay? Because if there's something wrong, it's going to affect your results. The other part is, when you capture your data, number your questionnaire and put it down. So you can double check every 10th questionnaire. When you double check the capturing of every 10th questionnaire and you find that, ooh, there's lots of mistakes, I suggest you redo the entire thing. Okay? But if you've captured it, and maybe there's 1 or 2 small mistakes you made, it's fine, you can correct it and go ahead. Okay? So the first thing is data preparation and preliminary analysis and ensuring that you have cleaned out all the mess or the mistakes that occur. That's editing the data as well. Handling blank responses. In that spreadsheet, anything not answered cannot be left as a blank. You've got to put in a 0. So if, as Sue mentioned earlier, what if someone does not answer something, it's quite fine as long as only 25% of that questionnaire is not answered. Okay? If it's more than 25% of the questionnaire, you can't put in zeros, it's a spoiled copy. That means 1 less in your sample. Okay? So it's always nice if you're collecting that questionnaires, make sure that on a questionnaire of 40 items, make sure that less than 10 items are not answered. Okay, that makes you 25%. Your coding we've covered already, pre-coding where we've provided codes like this, or we've post-coded it in this fashion. Categorization, you know the items that come together. You're going to do your analysis based on those items. And you know that if you've got R questions, it means negative questions, you are reversing your scale. Always checked in your key data, your spreadsheet for accuracy at all stages. Okay? That's your data analysis first stage. Now, we can do analysis in terms of two forms. Descriptive analysis, inferential analysis. Your descriptive analysis comes from that lowest level of scales, that is nominal scale. Okay? And your descriptive analysis at the most basic level allows you to do frequencies and percentages. So if you looked at departments and you ask people to answer which department they come from, you'll be able to guess how many came from the different departments, how many from marketing, production, etc. And you simply convert that from frequency to percentage. Okay? So your number in a department, for example 13, divided by your total number, 174, times 100 over 1 gives you the 7.5%. Likewise, in the accounting department, 5 divided by 174 times 100 gives you 2.9%. So you are able to, from your nominal scale, only determine frequencies and percentages. If you want then, remember you'll have the same for gender, you'll have the same for age, you'll have the same for tenure. Then you can go ahead and present it in some kind of a graph. Now your programs, Word and so forth, do these very well. So basically using the bar, the pie chart, the line, the column graph, the area graph, the donut, the bubble, the radar, whatever you want. Of course, you can choose the appropriate one for the appropriate place. Don't have the same kind of graph everywhere. When I say appropriate one for the appropriate place, imagine doing a bar chart for gender when you've just got two categories. So you've got one bar here and one bar there, rather not saying too much, okay? So use the appropriate bar chart. You can also interchange them, but that is what your descriptive analysis frequencies and percentages are allowing you to do. So we take descriptive analysis a little further. We take it into